There is still some pavement striping going on at the tri-state. Northbound Dundee to 22, there's some work in the right lane. And southbound 22 to Sanders, right lane closure. That's scheduled till 7. That's traffic. I'm Jim Alamonte on AM 560, The Answer.
Chicago's Morning Answer continues next. In our 1-hour heating and air conditioning weather center, we see partly to mostly sunny and colder conditions today, a high of 25. A moonlit sky, very chilly overnight, a low of 13. It's 20 right now. Next news coming up at 6. And Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
This hourly segment is brought to you by Real Estate Revealed with Randy Barcella, Sunday mornings starting at 8.
If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560, The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. The Brits have an election on Thursday, and Boris Johnson and the Conservatives are closing the show with a really fun ad. Boris Johnson, you know, he's got
from New York. He was born in New York.
Well, he's got the bit of that,
Trump
disheveled look going on, but he's actually a very sharp guy, a very skilled debater, and he's got quite a bit of
chutzpah,
character, color. He does a good job doing his version of Love Actually,
yes.
full like Bob Dylan, Homesick Subterranean Blues. This is the closing the show, basically saying the argument, making the argument. Let's just get this done and move on already.
Get all of this done and move on.
Vote Conservative on Thursday. Get
I'm sick of this.
done. What?
Well, they're arguing. They just need to get it done.
Stop the chaos.
I'll get it. Oh, hi.
Who is it?
Boris Johnson.
It's carol singers.
Give him a quid and tell him to bugger off.
And then he starts going through the cards. The other guy could win. You have to make a choice between a working majority and another gridlocked hung parliament arguing about Brexit. Enough. Let's get this done. And on it goes from there. You know, vote Conservative, actually, and it's awesome. It's really well done. I think it's got good sensibility. For more on what actually is going to happen on Thursday, we're pleased to be joined again by our friend Daniel Hannan, who's credited among many as one of the architects of Brexit, a long time coming, well before the sort of Theresa May, well before Boris Johnson, for years and years, actually. He's the author of a number of books, How We Invented Freedom and Why It Matters, The New Road to Serfdom, wrote in 2016, Why Vote to Leave, Why Vote for Brexit. Inventing Freedom is one of my favorites of his. He's a member of the European Parliament representing Southeast England for the Conservative Party. He's also a Washington Examiner columnist, and maybe next to the Magna Carta Memorial and Runnymede, there'll be a Brexit memorial one day with Dan Hannan's picture on it. Dan, thanks so much for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Always a pleasure to be with you guys. And by the way, Brexit itself has been a very long time coming. I have a little boy who is now 3.5 years old. He has lived his entire life in a country that has voted to leave the European Union but has not in fact left. That's basically why we're having this election.
Was he hoping that Benedict Cumberbatch would play you in the HBO movie about it? That seems like that was about 2.5 years ago.
I was kind of hoping, maybe Leonardo DiCaprio's
sure.
old now.
Oh, of course.
But the guy they ended up with, they found some old bald guy. I mean, unbelievable. He was like 67 and from Tennessee.
How could you let that happen?
Nothing like you. Absolutely nothing like you.
The worst thing was I got to say, he was a brilliant actor. He had my way of walking and sitting and moving my hands eerily well done, as they all did.
Well, so the ad that we were just talking about, the message of the ad, let's just get this done already and move on. That's where you Conservatives obviously feel the UK population is.
Right. I mean, first of all, I think the ad, by the way, was a brilliant trolling of that insufferable twerp, Hugh Grant, who, of course, plays that part in the
Yes.
original movie and who has now been strongly backing Jeremy Corbyn over the last couple of weeks. But yes, I think we've had a quite unpleasant culture war for the last 3 years in the UK. It's not a million miles away from what happened after Donald Trump's election 6 months later. People became very polarized, and the divisions became tribal. So during the referendum itself, there was still a fairly civil and civilized discussion about trade, sovereignty, money, migration, and so on. Once the result was in, the losing side was so shocked and disoriented that it became about the kinds of people we don't like, and one side felt that it was against ignorant working class oafs who had been lied to by unscrupulous demagogues like me, and the other side became about, we don't like these kind of sneering snobs who secretly detest their own country, right? I'm guessing familiar to some of your listeners in Chicago. And I don't see any way of getting past that until we have delivered Brexit in a way that is liberal and global and internationalist, that reassures the 48% who voted against it their worst fears were misplaced, and then we can move on to becoming a pro-business, tax-friendly, competitive, successful global economy.
Just one thing on actors, just the Hugh Grant thing. Just refer them to Anthony Hopkins, who in an interview with Brad Pitt this week said, the reason I don't talk about politics because it turns out actors are pretty stupid. At least he has some sort of, self-awareness.
It's so extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, Plato thought it was like a kind of moral prostitution. He thought that lying for a living was worse than actual physical prostitution. Rousseau wanted theatricals banned because he thought it destroyed the morals of a society. Wouldn't it be extraordinary if those guys could be transported in a time machine to our own age to see that we defer to actors on subjects other than acting? I mean, we turn them into kind of, moral figures. It's absolutely bizarre.
Well, why are some Brits fearful of leaving the European Union?
Well, people are always nervous about change, and people can always be persuaded that change is going to be disruptive and so on. And in the end, there's no way of overcoming that until you've done it and shown people that it's not that big a deal. I think during the period immediately after the referendum, people took up these entrenched positions. And they became convinced, in a way that, the New York Times and the Washington Post are also convinced, that Brexit was a kind of nostalgic, anti-immigrant, nativist project. And, there's no way you can argue people out of that position. The only way to convince them that that is incorrect is to show that after we've left the European Union, we will remain a country that is interested and engaged in the affairs of every continent, including Europe, and also that we will be able to revive our close friendships with old allies, not least in the other great English-speaking democracies. One of the first consequences that I hope will come after Brexit is a good, deep, comprehensive free trade agreement with the United States. You're our biggest investors. We're your biggest investors. We're each other's biggest trading partners. It's a natural market that rests on language and legal systems and similar accountancy rules and all the rest of it. And we haven't been able to do that because Brussels until now has controlled our trade.
Now, just continuing the parallels between the UK and the US, last week, seems like maybe you have a bit of a deep state problem, as we say here. Last week, you had the lead envoy for Brexit in the British Embassy in D.C., Alexandra Hall, resign, suggesting that she just could no longer deliver messages from the political leaders in Britain that were less than fully honest.
Yes, I mean, I'm not sure I'd call that the deep state. It's more kind of shallow to medium state of these often quite junior officials who trot out these cliches. I mean, don't ever make the mistake of thinking that because somebody is a civil servant or a diplomat that they necessarily have expertise. If anything, they are even more vulnerable to the groupthink and the fashionable opinions of the age. And on this, I mean, she is just wrong. I've had a number of really positive and productive conversations about trade with people in the administration and with congressmen on both sides of the aisle. We've got the capacity to do some big and impressive things here. we could have very quickly a US-UK free trade agreement that will be a gold standard, because it will be about mutual recognition. It'll be about the little guy rather than the big corporates. I get the impression that this administration wants to get it done on this side of the election. I mean, this side of your election, which is a tight timetable, but not completely impossible. Just think that within a year, we could have agreed, even if it hasn't completed all its ratification, we could have agreed a massive, deep, comprehensive FTA between the world's biggest economy and the world's fifth biggest economy. That has good knock-on consequences for the whole world.
Absolutely. Now, continuing the parallels again, media coverage here in the run-up to your election on Thursday. The media coverage of Jeremy Corbyn is really interesting. I always like the gymnastics that some members of the media will do to advance their candidate. And what I've seen from some of the tabloids over there is, hey, you might not like Jeremy Corbyn. Hey, you may not like his anti-Semitism. Hey, you may not like his desire to nationalize certain industries. But, it's important that you vote for him anyway.
What an extraordinary moral contortion is required to come up with the sentence, you may not like the anti-Semitism, but, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is completely unprecedented for us. We've, of course, like every other country in the world, we have had individual anti-Semites down the years, but never before have they infiltrated one of the major parties. And that is something that gives us a very different history from most of Europe, right? So this is completely outside our experience in the UK. And I think there's a moral test there for the rest of, for the non-Jewish population. If you're prepared to say, I don't like the anti-Semitism, but, right, in other words, my tribal dislike of the Conservatives or my dislike of Brexit trumps my concern for my Jewish fellow citizens, I think that would say something really unsettling about us as a country. It's also important to stress that the Marxism is new. Again, something that makes us very different from most of Europe. We've never had a socialist revolutionary party in beyond kind of 2% sort of thing in Britain. Our Labour Party was, well, what one of its great leaders famously said, it owes more to Methodism than to Marxism, right? It was a broad working class movement that was never really about tearing things down. It was rooted in temperance societies and working men's libraries and brass bands and nonconformist churches. This anti-British, anti-American Marxist virus has never really infected it before. And I think there's a real test of the entire electorate now. Are we prepared to tolerate this kind of thing simply because we don't like the fact that we're leaving the European Union, or we don't like this or that aspect of conservative policy? I fundamentally have a higher opinion of my fellow countrymen than that, which is why I am quietly optimistic about Thursday's vote. He is Daniel Hannan. He's a member of the EU, representing Southeast England for the Conservative Party, Washington Examiner columnist. Pick up any number of his books: Inventing Freedom, How We Invented Freedom, Why It Matters, The New Road to Serfdom, Why America Must Not Follow Europe. A lot of parallels, as we've been discussing here in the run-up to our respective elections. Good luck on Thursday. Dan Hannan, thanks so much for joining us again. Thank you very much, Dan.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's news, opinion, insight. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
This is attorney Stephen Leahy, host of the IRS Radio Hour, heard right here on AM 560 every Sunday evening at 5 o'clock. Let me tell you about Bill. Bill's